Thank you, Frank. Tēnā koutou e te whānau. Tēnā koutou ngā manuhiri e noho nei me ngā tangata on Zoom. Nau mai, haere mai ki tēnei whare kakia. Ko Maria Hayward, tōku ingoa. Ko au te kai whakahaere mō tēnei rā. Welcome, Unitarian whānau and visitors. Welcome to this special place made sacred today and indeed for the last 124 years. Welcome to those joining us remotely, to those here in the building, and to those watching the recording at a later time.
Excuse me, Maria, can you stop sharing?
I can, yes. Oversharing. If you're a visitor here today, thank you for choosing to be here with us. The theme for today's service is a 101 on colonisation in Aotearoa, and it's guided by our fourth principle, the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. If you're a visitor with us this morning, please know that you're very welcome to join us for the brief discussion after the service and for morning tea directly after that. For those of you on Zoom, please join the same discussion in a Zoom group or groups. And Ruby, I wonder if you could light the chalice for us. We light this chalice today in honour of the Unitarian Universalist fourth principle, the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And the word for the chalice writing were written by William Ellery Channing, who was an early American Unitarian. I call that mind free, which jealously guards its intellectual rights and powers, which calls no one master, which does not content itself with a passive or hereditary faith, which opens itself to light whensoever it may come, which receives new truth as an angel from heaven. We will now recite together the covenant of this rōpū. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is the sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humankind in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow in harmony. Thus do we covenant with each other and with our God. Reverend Alec Taliafoa mentioned in his talk last year about Polynesian Panthers, colonisation and its effects. And Catherine Delahunty earlier this year shared with us the ongoing detrimental effects of colonisation on West Papua. Some of us participating in the service today have predecessors who were colonisers. Mine were. And our home countries enjoyed the spoils or the wealth that accrued from colonisation. But maybe there are also a few in our group who are descendants of colonised peoples, and your ancestors might not have fared as well. In nearly all the colonised countries, Indigenous people still today are more or less at the bottom of the pile. So I wonder, what did the colonisers do to create these unequal societies? I decided to undertake that free and responsible search for truth, yes, Principle 4, the green one, because I wanted to understand more about the detrimental effects of colonisation. But this is an extensive field, and I've only covered the tip of the iceberg. One aspect of colonialism that was the dramatic accrual of wealth by the colonising countries and the corresponding poverty inflicted on Indigenous groups. India, for example, was one of the wealthiest countries in the world at the time of the British takeover. But by the time they left, it was one of the poorest. But another aspect of colonisation was the racist belief in the superiority of the colonisers. So I'd like to share with you today the beginning of my journey into learning about how colonisation and racism had a damaging effect on the beautiful motu we occupy today, Aotearoa. Let us pause now, however, to share the personal joys and concerns of each of you. Please come up to the front, give us your name, light a candle, and briefly express your joy and concern. Thank you. I light this final candle for all those joys and concerns that are in our hearts but remain unsaid. I ngā mana, i ngā reo, i ngā karangatanga, maha, tēnā koutou katoa. Okay. I have a book. Here it is here. It looks like a Bible. And I purchased this book from the hard-to-find bookstore, which used to be in Onehunga, but is now in Eden Terrace. It's a children's book, and it's not dated, but I would say early 20th century, entitled The Wonder Book of Empire. And as you might have guessed, it's about the Great British Empire. So I looked at this book recently, and today's homily is the outcome. The book provides a very good representation of the cultural attitudes and opinions of the time. In particular, the attitudes towards colonised people and nations. I was interested to see how Aotearoa and Australia were depicted, and I was also keen to examine how a possibly racist colonial ideology was promoted and promulgated. I saw this racism, and maybe you will too, as I relate some linguistic examples. A key thing I noticed, though, was that although there were linguistic differences in the way the various colonised groups were described, all the colonised groups were designated much less favourable language than that used to talk about the British colonisers, which is not unexpected. I need to begin by pointing out that the language in this particular book is actually what is called a benign model in colonial discourse. That is, the aim of the authors was not to demean or devalue people. It was supposed to show how interesting Indigenous people were. But even that is patronising. And indeed, so much of the language, even in this benign form, is very denigrating towards some nations more than others. Australian First People and African people, for example, are described in much less benign language than that employed for New Zealand Māori. But for today, I will focus predominantly on the descriptions of the tangata whenua of this motu Aotearoa. The book has chapters on 18 of the 61 British colonies. The chapter headings are interesting in themselves. and include, for example, the following titles, if you're able to read them: The Red Indians of Canada and the Blacks of Australia and Papua. These titles may already be making you feel a little squeamish, as what's happened is that Indigenous groups are reduced to just a colour, which is dehumanising and degrading, and it's just plain racist. Racism is when one group talks of its own superiority whilst describing, directly or by implication, the other as inferior. Shane Jones made a similarly dehumanising comment a while ago in referring to the largest population in the world as a cuisine item with his butter chicken comment. And of course, Winston Peters just last week with his "go back to where you came from" comment. The book frequently refers to the British possessions. Indeed, at the back of the book, there is a list of the millions of colonised people who are described as being possessed by the British. And these figures, by the way, include nearly 5 million people in Australia, 315 million in India, and there were, if you're interested, 1 million people in New Zealand. Plus, of course, millions and millions more in the other possessed nations. By the way, that 1 million people in Aotearoa was the population in 1908. Of these, only 20% were Māori. The Māori population had halved in number since the arrival of the British. The authors of this book also claim that the British now protect these people of the lands, but the massive decrease in the Māori population doesn't exactly attest to any degree of protection. Likewise, the decimation of almost an entire ethnicity in Tasmania does not indicate any level of protection whatsoever. Yet these words are used in this book for children. Let me now relate to you some other interesting linguistic exemplars used throughout the book. You'll notice that colonised people are almost always depicted negatively or as inferior. I want to begin by talking about nomenclature. That's a word for naming, ways of naming people. The colonisers get very respectful nomenclature. They are called British adventurers, pioneers, brave soldiers, or frequently the neutral term settlers. But the Indigenous people in the book never get deferential or reverential language. They are called natives, savages, and as mentioned earlier, just blacks. In one instance, a group is labelled almost cannibals. Almost. I'll tell you about that soon. When battles are described in each of the chapters, the British are almost always described as being brave and glorious, but the colonised people are described as being vicious and savage. These are the actual terms used. Both parties are killing, but the British are brave and the Indigenous people are vicious. Additionally, the British are said to advance on or break the power of the enemy, whereas Indigenous people might, for example, raid or slaughter people. Same actions, different language. If the British killed hundreds of people, the event is described euphemistically like this, quote, "They crushed the authors of lawlessness." And in one chapter, there is this statement: "It was a glorious page in history, And when the day was over, the dead, that's the Indigenous people, lay piled in heaps. Yes, a horrible image, and don't forget, this is a book for children. But the Indigenous people have already been othered via language constructions like blacks and savages, and the children who are readers wouldn't be expected to feel the shock or sadness about people lying in heaps, as they already see this group as not the same as them. Maybe they're even considered barely human. Certainly, this is how the authors portray them linguistically. The irony in this book is that it boasts about how many more Indigenous people the British killed rather than the other way round. And this killing by the British is described as subduing the Māori. But Indigenous people who killed far fewer English are said to pillage and slaughter the British soldiers. The absolute opposite taxonomies should have been employed. Taxonomy is a word that linguistics use to describe lists of words in a category. You can probably already see that the different taxonomies in this, that are employed in this text. These linguistic terms and constructions embed in readers subtle perceptions of the respective groups. One is good, the other not so. What we should be wondering is what happens to the mana, the self-esteem, the self-image of the group who are described negatively. Another taxonomy in the Wonder Book of Empire is that Indigenous people are lazy or indolent. But the writers also describe how the Indigenous people serve the British and do hard labour for them. In one chapter there is this depiction, quote, "The white men are carried about in mochillas or hammocks slung on bamboo poles." There's a picture, and have a look who's carrying these mochillas. The writers continue, "It looks lazy," for the white people that is, "it looks lazy, but it's comfortable and rapid." This statement clearly assumes the respective roles of masters and servants, and that it's okay for white people to be lazy, but not for Indigenous people. Interestingly, Māori in this book are never referred to by skin colour. There is a weird statement that sounds like it's supposed to be praising Māori, but, well, see what you think. The Māoris of New Zealand, by the way, there's no plural to the word Māori. Reo does not have a plural for nouns. The article gets pluralised. But anyway, the Māoris of New Zealand, in this quote, are almost the only race that has survived wars with Europeans and shows signs of living as equals with them. Later, the book tells us how the equals are not exactly equal. There is an assumption in the book that local people will be grateful to the colonisers, and indeed Māori are criticised for objecting to white people occupying their land, as if this is surprising and unacceptable behaviour. Yet it says about Australian Indigenous people that they apparently have yielded their country to the white settlers, and that often they become, quote, greatly attached to their white masters. And remember, I'm quoting from a benign example of colonial language. Other texts are much, much worse. Is the language racist? As I mentioned earlier, racism is the belief that one race is superior to another. That belief is exactly what the language that I'm quoting today demonstrates. Is it any wonder that with this notion of superiority, that there's an erosion of self-esteem, confidence, and mana of colonised groups? It's a hard pill to swallow for those of us who are descendants of colonisers, but it's important medicine if we want equity, justice and inclusion. Hey, all of our values in this community and the country that we love. I just want to make a further comment on the term yielding. Inscribing an attempt of the British to gain yet more land in Australia, the people who did not yield were, by the way, described as savages and almost cannibals, yes, for not yielding their land. But then there's this phrase, the civilised ones did not resist. Interesting use of the term civilised. Yielding to the British invaders was considered civilised. Invading other people's land, apparently also. You can probably by now see the very subjective bias in this text, and there's a lot of it. I'll share a few more examples. Here's another quote. On the whole, great progress has been made in civilising and Christianising the British possessions in the Pacific. Yes, that's people they're referring to. Quote, in most of them, the natives are being encouraged to educate and improve themselves, but they all require Europeans as their leaders. The language examples that I've just relayed to you are the language of colonisation. And although I'm focusing on British colonisers in this korero, as you will know, there were many colonising countries and most had similar attitudes. And most managed to marginalise and impoverish the Indigenous or First Nation peoples within just a few years, mostly through massive theft of land and resources. When the language in the text is more positive, it's nearly always patronising and suggests that the natives are happy with their subservient position. The Zulu people in Africa are even described as being proud to serve their British masters. Interestingly, whilst simultaneously boasting about apparently bringing civilization as well as freedom and happiness to more than 60 nations, the book also boasts of the massive wealth accrued by the British from these colonies. And this is presented as evidence of their superiority, stealing the wealth that other people made. Contemporary research has analysed the amount of wealth accrued and stolen by the British. An analysis was cited in a recent Oxfam report and puts the figure stolen from India alone in today's terms at over $64 trillion. This wealth transfer, identified as the drain of wealth by early Indian nationalists, was a systematic process that contributed significantly to Britain's industrialisation and to India's impoverishment. In New Zealand, Māori owned 100% of the land at the time of colonisation. Within just 20 years, they had lost 20%, and by the mid-20th century, they owned only 5%. If paid fairly for this, they should have been extremely wealthy. Instead, Britain became extremely wealthy. Although colonised nations weren't always left with nothing, as Archbishop Desmond Tutu explained, he said, when the missionaries came to Africa, they had the Bible and we had the land. They said, let us pray. We closed our eyes. When we opened them, we had the Bible and they had the land. There is much to be said about colonisation. When we become informed and also feel the pain of an oppressed group, the pain of colonisation, and if we also have a desire for virtue, for morally good behaviour, being informed is helpful. Knowing the truth is helpful. I need these reminders to keep me on track, to keep me fighting for social justice. When we feel something deeply, we have the potential to transform, to improve, to become better human beings. I think maybe that is what connects all of us who are attending this service today. And maybe, like me, you want to continue learning more about colonisation and its negative impact. If so, do let me know, and also let me know if you know of any experts who could talk more to us on this topic. Nō reira, tēnā rā koutou katoa. For closing words, I want to read some words from Reverend Alec Toliafoa's talk to us early last year. He was talking about the Polynesian Panther group that he was part of, which they fought for 15 years for justice for Polynesian people in Aotearoa. I think what he said was inspiring, and he concluded his talk with these words. So what now? Now we preach. We remember. Remembering is empowering. We resist. We make that one more courageous step, that one more hymn, that one more prayer. We make our protest a prayer and our prayer a protest. To build that world we sang about earlier, we'll build a land where justice rolls down like water and righteousness flows like a mighty stream. Because racism still holds a pen, still writes policy, still knocks on doors at dawn. But we walk with memory, we walk with courage, and we walk with a different law, the law of aroha, love. The law that empowers us to believe another world is not only possible, it is already being born. Let it be so. Ruby, I wonder if you could extinguish the candle for us. We extinguish this candle, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, the fire of commitment, or the power of transformation. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Okay, we've got a good 15 minutes for discussion today, and I thought it might be worthwhile just reflecting on what we can do today to address inequality, and especially in terms of race in Aotearoa. So I've put down as the question, what have you noticed or seen in your social or your working or everyday life that evidences colonialism? And what can we as individuals do if we're not happy with this?